Hello and welcome to another episode of PuntoHowto. Now if there's one thing that's important with driving, it's the ability to go, but probably more importantly is the ability to stop. Now what we have tackled before on this channel is front disc brakes, which I will put a link to the video for that at the top of the page right now. We have also covered rear drum brakes on some of the older Puntos, but one thing we haven't looked at so far is rear disc brakes, which is what we're going to be having a look at today. Now, not every car came with disc brakes. If you take a look at my 2006 Fiat Grande Punto, it had rear drums. If you take a look at my 2004 Fiat Punto HGT diesel, it had rear discs. More often than not, what decides whether a car gets rear disc brakes is if the manufacturer decides it's a sporty model or not. Anyway, let's get to it. Let's start off by removing the back wheels of the car. I've got the car jacked up and secured on axle stands to begin with. So we'll get the wheel nuts out and we'll get the wheels off and out of the way. One thing I hate on the current Fiat models is these little bolts that secure the brake discs onto the hubs. I'm going to give them a liberal coating of plus gas just to try and loosen them up, and try and spray some behind the disc as well to try and get the backs of those bolts. The main problem is that they rust. They have torque bits to undo them, which when you then try and undo them, the actual pattern in the screw just disintegrates, and then you end up having to drill or cut them out. I much prefer the old stud setup where you would have a long pin and you had a normal sort of nut on the back of that pin, and you could get a deep socket over the top of the pin and you could undo them usually without too much trouble. However, these ones were seized solid, so with a multi-tool I cut a slot into the top of each of the screws, and then that way I can use a large screwdriver to take them out. Obviously, in this instance, I'm not too worried about damaging the disc because I'm replacing the disc. You just don't want to go too deep and damage the hub behind it. And with a large screwdriver and a spanner on the back of it, you can see how effortless the screws are to remove. The reason I'm removing these screws first and not touching the brake caliper at the moment is I've got the handbrake applied, so it's holding the disc firmly, and therefore the disc of the whole assembly isn't going to rotate as I try and undo these screws. But now they are out, I'm going to turn my attention to the brake caliper. Here is a quick close-up of the discs and pads. As you can see, the disc is quite badly lipped, and although the pads look okay, I think we might as well change them all at the same time. So here is the brake caliper, and I'm going to begin by separating the caliper from the brake pad carrier, which will all become apparent in a moment, but basically the centre part of the brake is the caliper and the outer red part is the brake pad carrier. Here is some footage from the other side of the car, just showing where the bolts are located slightly better. There is this one at the top, and then there is another one just below it at the bottom. Once you have removed both bolts, you can remove the caliper. The easiest way to do this is to put a screwdriver between the caliper and one of the pads and just leave the pad in slightly just to create some space for you to remove the caliper. The brake pads then remove relatively easily, you just slide them out. And on the inner pad you'll find there is a cable attached to it which is a brake wear sensor. You just need to unplug that from its little plug on the wiring loom coming down to the wheel. There are just two more bolts on the back of the brake pad carrier. You just remove them with a socket or a spanner, and then you can take the pad carrier out of the way, and then you can remove the brake disc. After you've taken the brake disc off, this is the point where you can go to town with the brake cleaner. I don't think you can really go too mad with the brake cleaner, just to get rid of any brake dust, any grime, any grease, anything that's built up around the hub, anything that's built up on the back plate, anything that's built up on the caliper. Just try and get everything as clean as you can, just get rid of all the grease and muck that you can with the brake cleaner, and use a little wire brush or a little stiff nylon brush just to try and brush off any stubborn dirt. Just continuing the cleanup. This is the brake pad carrier, and it's got these little metal clips that just help the pads move in and out without too much resistance, so they easily ping off. And then I'm just going to remove the slider pins as well, because I'm going to clean them up whilst I'm at it. Sorry you can't really see that, but they just pull out like so. Just separate the rubber gaiter, the rubber boot, from the slider pin to remove them. And then again, I'm going to coat this liberally with brake cleaner and give it a damn good clean up, just so everything is nice and clean and smooth running. After that, I'm going to install the new stainless steel brake hardware. These are brand new clips that go in and support the pads so that they have something nice and smooth to slide against, like so. And we also got some new APEC discs and some TRW pads. Quite difficult to get for this car because there aren't that many of them about. The new brake discs get a liberal cleaning with some more brake cleaner. Every new brake disc has usually got a coating of oil on it to keep it from rusting whilst it's in storage, so make sure to give that coating of oil a good clean off, because the last thing you want is oil on your brakes once you set out on your first drive. Once clean, you simply place them over the hub, and with some new screws if you have them, or in this case I've reused the old ones because I don't really feel that they do an awful lot, reattach the new disc to the hub, screw it in place with these little securing screws. So from this point onwards, it's just reassembly. So the brake carrier can go back onto the back of the disc like so, and we pop the bolts in to secure that in place. Once you've secured the brake carrier in place, you're going to want to put some new brake pads in. Again, as with everything else, give the brake pads just a quick spruce over with some brake cleaner just to make sure any oils or contaminants are gone off the braking surface. At this point you can put the new brake pads into the brake pad carrier. It's with these particular pads, they're all the same. There's 4 pads that are all identical, and the brake pad wear sensor goes into the back of the pad that you put in the back. These just slot into the new stainless steel hardware that you put in earlier. Just be sure to put a little drop of grease either on the little tabs on the pads themselves or on the stainless steel sliding hardware that you put in earlier. The pad that goes in the back has the brake pad wear sensor on it, as shown here. This needs to be attached to the pad at the back, and this just clips in afterwards, so it's a wire that comes separately in the packet, like so. And then when you put the pad in the back, you just push it into one of the holes in the tabs, all the way through as hard as you can, and then as the pads wear down to a certain level, that will throw up a warning on the dashboard telling you that the pads are worn. And now comes the part that I hate. It's winding back the calipers. So as you use the handbrake, it ratchets the piston of the caliper outwards, and the idea is you can't just push it back in again so that the handbrake will always hold the car when you apply the handbrake. You need a special tool for this. They are left and right handed tools, and what you do is you slot that tool against the piston, and there are some little grooves in either side of the piston to help lock into the tool, and then you wind the tool against the caliper, as you can see here, and then it is a simple case of just winding the caliper round in circles, and as you watch, the caliper will slowly start to push its way back in again. This is so that when it's wound all the way back in, it will slot back over the new brake pads. If you don't wind it back in, then the caliper itself will be adjusted for the old brake pads, and you won't get it back over the new brake pads, which are much thicker, have much more braking material on them. This can be hard work, but I'm going to speed up the footage so you can see how it winds the piston back into the caliper. Now with the caliper bolted back in place, you can see we've pretty much finished the job. We just give the brake disc a spin to make sure that nothing is catching or binding. That little sort of ringing noise is just the gentle touch of the pads against the disc, which is absolutely fine. Going to give it one last spray with brake cleaner and just make sure that any grease or oil on my fingers hasn't contaminated the brake discs. Make sure everything is nice and clean where we're going to fit the wheels back on. And then the last job is just to put the wheels back on the car and then take it for its test drive. One thing you absolutely must remember to do is to replace the discs and pads on the other side of the car as well. Obviously don't drive off whilst having only done one side of the car. What's interesting, when I did do the other side of the car, you'll probably notice from this picture here, is that the caliper itself has lost most of its paint. So these calipers were painted red by Fiat in the factory because this is the sporting model. But the red paint has flaked off on the driver's side of the car. Driver's side is the right hand side of the car here in the UK. Didn't think much of this at the time, but it later turned out that the brake caliper was binding and it was getting very hot, which caused the paint to flake off the caliper. So in an upcoming video I'm going to be tackling changing a brake caliper on the back of this car. So keep tuned. If you haven't done so already, subscribe. Click the little bell icon when it comes up and that will notify you when I release new videos, and therefore will notify you when I release that video on changing the rear brake caliper. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed these videos, do give us a thumbs up. Do, if you haven't done so already, consider subscribing to the channel. If you want to leave us a comment in the section below the video. You can also head over to Facebook and talk to us over there. If you are still watching at this point, on the left hand side of the screen there'll be some other videos that you might be interested in, and on the right hand side of the screen it'll be a big subscribe icon. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for watching and take care.